के चुनाव जीतते हैं।
Who has the edge in Bihar Phase 2?
नीतीश कुमार को रखना है कि हटाना है?
Who gains from higher turnout? Youth or women, what will swing the election? You're watching Battleground Bihar with Rahul Kanwal.
Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching NDTV Battleground from a brand new election studio. The second and last phase of polling all set for tomorrow in Battleground Bihar. And over the next 2 hours, the NDTV election team will be taking a close look at the factors at play on the ground in this state that loves its politics. We'll have ground reports, we'll have pundits, we'll have data insights to give you the best ringside seat of what to expect during the second and last phase of polling in Bihar. On the back of the trends that emerged after the first phase, I've put together a set of X factors that will determine what happens on the ground in Bihar tomorrow. The biggest question, I've just come back after spending a week in Bihar, the third trip during this election season, and the biggest topic of conversation at this moment is who benefits from the bumper turnout. This is the highest voter turnout that Bihar has seen. 8% surge from the last elections. If turnout is up so significantly, who benefits the most from the enhancement in voter turnout? That's the first X factor which we'll be looking at very closely during this broadcast. The second factor, the 10,000 rupee Mahila Rozgar scheme by the Chief Minister. Has this proven to be a game changer? During the first phase, we saw massive queues, lots of women lining up to vote. Were these, like has been the case in the past elections, votes which were heading towards the JDU and the NDA? That's the one question that's being looked at, whether this 10,000 rupee Jivika scheme has proven to be a game changer. Let's come to the third X factor. People would anticipate, or at least I did before I went, that Nitish Kumar's age, his mental acuity would be an issue of concern for voters. Far from. On the ground, it seems that there is an underlying sympathy for Nitish Kumar, that he's the man who steered our state for the last 2 decades. People seem to think of him reasonably well. Even if it's not glowing, they're definitely not thinking of him very negatively. There is in fact an underlying element of sympathy towards Nitish Kumar. That's X factor number 3. To what extent will this play out during polling tomorrow? Now, one of the things that I picked up on the ground is that you've got women who are enthused by Nitish Kumar at the state and the welfare agenda of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. They seem to be supporting the NDA. On the other hand, you've got youth, a lot of migrants, even locals, worried about issues like unemployment, underemployment, joblessness. They're yearning for change, whether they see Tejaswi Yadav as being the change agent or they see Prashant Kishore as the change agent. But this youth vote is likely to get fractured between the MGB, the NDA and Prashant Kishore. So you've got those two dynamics playing out. One, women yearning for Nitish Kumar and Modi. The other, the youth yearning for change, because for the past 2 decades, they've only seen Nitish Kumar in one form or shape or the other. They're now wanting to look beyond. Let's come now to the fourth X factor that I picked up during my travels through the state of Bihar. Now, Lalu Yadav's magic was that his alliance had the Yadavs, had the Muslims, but also had a lot of Ati Pichdi Jatis, the backward caste. Over the last few elections, the RJD has largely been consigned to the Muslims and the Yadavs. Tejaswi Yadav is trying through the IIP, through the Vikashil Insan Party of Mukesh Sawhney, and they come into play during phase 2 in a very big way. He's been trying to expand the Muslim Yadav vote bank. To what extent is Tejaswi, on the back of smaller parties like Gupta, like the Vikashil Insan Party of Mukesh Sawhney, able to expand on the core MY vote bank of the Gathbandhan? That's the next X factor that will determine what happens on the field in Bihar. Now, Prashant Kishore, so much noise, surround sound, around the Jan Swaraj party. On the ground, not quite as much right before polling. Did the campaign peak too early? Did PK make a tactical mistake by not contesting himself? The general, in some ways, moving out of the battlefield himself. Will this prove costly? This again is an X factor we'll talk about. Guests joining me in the studio in just a short while to try and understand this. From here, let's move to the next X factor. Remember, it is in the Simanchal region that the AIMIM of Asaduddin Owaisi damaged the prospects of the Gathbandhan in the 2020 assembly elections. This time though, and I was in Kishanganj and Purnian areas in that part, people felt that the level of charm that Owaisi had come down, because ultimately out of his MLAs, 4 of them switched over to the RJD. 3 of them didn't get tickets this time around, but they did switch. Therefore, are Muslims now feeling that a vote for AIM is as lucrative as it was in the last election, or will they polarize around the Gathbandhan? That's the next X factor. Let's now come to the next X factor. This is about Rahul Gandhi from the Brazilian model in Haryana, who ultimately didn't turn out to be a model, but throughout he's been leveling with full gusto the charge that votes are being stolen, that this democracy has been bought out and is being distorted, that this is about vote adhikar. That's his big idea. How does this play out? Does this actually rally Gathbandhan supporters, or do they think, hey, if my vote is not going to count for change, is it even worth my while going out and voting? Both those factors playing themselves out. Is this actually encouraging Congress and RJD voters to go out, or is it discouraging them? कि अगर पहले ही decide हो गया election, तो जाने का क्या फायदा? That's the one X factor we'll be looking at. The last X factor we'll be tracking on this broadcast is, and this is what Prashant Kishore in particular and Tejaswi Yadav are hoping for, that you've got a lot of migrants. They've come back for the Chhath Puja. Many have stayed back to vote. Some went back after the first phase, the others waiting to vote in the second phase and then head back. Will the migrants act along traditional caste lines like they typically do? Or will they act as one youth bulge, one youth community? Now this again is a factor that we'll be looking at very closely, because this is what the opposition is largely banking on. So we have a lot to process and digest over the next 2 hours. Let's get started by giving you a snapshot of all the salvos that were fired in the battlefield of Bihar hours before polling begins in the second and final phase.
पहला चरण का मतदान कब हुआ? 6 नवंबर को। आज हम बैठ के पीसी कर रहे हैं 10 नवंबर को। 4 दिन बाद भी आंकड़े जो है सार्वजनिक नहीं किए गए हैं। दिस इज अ जोक। कितना टेक्नोलॉजी का जमाना है, एआई का जमाना है। ये बताओ, अमित शाह और मोदी जी के राज में इलेक्शन कमीशन ठप हो गया है।
The BJP along with the NDA is going to register a decisive, sweeping and historical victory in the Bihar Assembly elections. और मैं बड़ी जिम्मेदारी के साथ कहना चाहता हूं कि श्रीमान तेजस्वी जी अपने पिताजी की विरासत को आगे बढ़ा रहे हैं दोनों क्षेत्रों में, भ्रष्टाचार में और कुशासन में और खौफ में।
और जो लोग ये दावा कर रहे हैं कि वोट किसको पड़ा है, उसको जब ये ही नहीं पता है कि वोट पड़ा कितना है, लेकिन लोग टीवी पर, यूट्यूब पर आकर बड़े बड़े बयान दे रहे हैं कि वोट किसको पड़ रहा है। भाई, जब तुम्हें यही नहीं पता है कि कितने लोग वोट दे रहे हैं, तो ये कैसे पता चल रहा है कि वो व्यक्ति किसको वोट दे रहा है? इसलिए ये लोकतंत्र का पर्व है चुनाव। 14 तारीख को परिणाम आने दीजिए, आपको दिखेगा बिहार में देश का राजनीतिक इतिहास लिखा जाता हुआ दिखेगा।
Who will have the last laugh? Will it be Tejaswi? Will it be the NDA? Will it be Prashant Kishore? Arsh se fash, said PK. He is the master political strategist. We will know very soon. I want to give you a sense of what to expect during the second phase. I also want to introduce our guests joining me in the studio. Tehseen Poonawalla, welcome to the new election studio. Tehseen, great to have you. Welcome.
Glad to be here.
Ajit Jha is back from Simanchal, joining us in the studio again.
Nice.
With us from outside, we have Prabhu Chawla, India's leading political journalist. I have Jai Mrig. Jai Mrig has been working with the NDTV team, helping crunch a lot of numbers. Amitabh Tiwari is part of the NDTV election panel, runs Vote Vibe, comes from the state of Bihar, understands its politics. I want to go across and show you on the NDTV leaderboard what the second phase of elections actually looks like. So if you look at the second phase of elections, remember 121 seats are done. This is phase 2, 122 seats left. It's the central part of Bihar which for the large part has gone to polls in the first phase. That's marked as white. It's the extremity of Bihar all across the state which go to polls in the second phase. A lot of it in the Bhojpur region, in the southern part of Bihar, went along with the Mahagathbandhan in the first phase. And as you came up north and towards the eastern parts of the state, that's where the NDA did extremely well. That's what happened in the 2020 assembly elections. If I break this down to give you a sense of the party-wise tally from the 2020 assembly elections, out of these 122 seats, the BJP has 42, the RJD has 33, the Janata Dal United has 20, the Congress has 11, the CPI-ML 5. That's where things stand at the starting point on the leaderboard. What I want to do though is focus on the surge in voter turnout. Try and explain that to you and then talk to our experts about what this means. Is this election already settled? Because it's in phase 1 that the RJD was strong. Long queues of women were seen. What does that mean? And what impact does SIR have on the first phase of polling and the surge that we've seen? So let's spend some time trying to dissect and understand what we've seen in polling percentage during the first phase, and then we'll get in a word from our guests. Now here's the big picture. The turnout percentage stood at 65.08, which is about 8% more than the last assembly elections. Out of the 3.73 crore electors, 2.43 crore electors voted. So that's about 8% up. Remember, 8% is a big jump. It's not a small jump. In a state like Bihar, with traditionally low voting percentages because a lot of people are migrants, they're working elsewhere, 8% is a pretty big jump. Let's now come to the next data set, which will try and put this in context for you. Now remember, one of the big factors which is being spoken of a lot in the build up to the Bihar elections has been SIR, the inclusive rolls. Now out of the 121 seats that went to polls in the first phase, there were 18.3 lakh voters whose names were deleted. Across the state, on the 243 seats, 47.8 lakh voters had their names deleted. Now this is about 4.89% of the total voters who existed at the start of the year on the voter rolls in Bihar, which means while voting percentage has gone up by 8%, the number of voters has also gone down by 4%. So do remember that. I want to come now to the third data set that we are putting out on the screen right now. Now, the voter turnout after SIR stood at 65.08. The votes deleted by SIR was about 3.9% in the first phase. So if you look at the voter turnout, if you do the maths, and if you look at voter turnout without SIR, it stands at 62.05, which essentially means that while it looks like there's been a 7.79% increase in voter turnout, and there has been, but if you take all the dead, the duplicate, the bogus voters away, without any SIR, the actual increase would have only been 4.76%. So that's important. The voter turnout is not necessarily 8% up from last time, it is, but if you take the SIR factor away, it actually comes down to 4.76. Let's spend some time with Amitabh Tiwari at the outset to try and explain this to our voters, to our viewers, because if the vote percentage went up so substantially, Amitabh, to what extent would you attribute this to SIR, and to what extent do you attribute this to a surge of voter enthusiasm which led to more participation than we've seen in elections going back to 1950?
I think many of the people or migrants have returned to vote because they fear that if they do not vote, then their names could be struck off as permanently shifted whenever the next SIR or the summary revision takes place. That's why you see a lot of migrants going back and staying after Chhath, despite the elections being more than a week to 10 days away, and going out and vote. Even you see a lot of minority community migrants, as per anecdotes, coming back and voting because they fear that if they do not vote, their names will be deleted. Of course, it is competitive politics. All the supporters of the three alliances feel that these three alliances have good chances of winning, and they have come out and vote in larger numbers. So, I mean, one of the reasons is that there is a good mobilization by party cadres of all alliances. And on top of that, of course, we have the Mahila Rozgar Yojana, which may have enthused more women voters to come out and vote, because it's not only about rupees 10,000, which they have already received, 1.5 crore women. There is also a chance that they could receive up to 2 lakh rupees for expansion of their business after 6 months if NDA comes to power. So I think these three factors, I think, largely are responsible for this increase.
Jaimrik, your sense of enhanced voter participation, usually voter participation goes up when there's a big surge election. You know, they're yearning for change, lots of people come out, there's a lot of anger. That's typically when voter participation goes up. In a business as usual election where you've got a chief minister who's been around for a long time, who's ailing and therefore not a fresh, new, energetic candidate, you wouldn't expect voter participation to go up in this fashion. What do you make of the fact that voter participation net is up about 8%? If you take SIR out, it's about 4.76%. And you know, the data that we were discussing this morning shows that this is the most that Bihar has voted going back till 1950.
Yeah, I think this is, there are two factors to this. One is certainly the mobilization of women voters, point. I would say a couple of factors. Second is the stabilization of the two-party system or a two-front system, wherein each smaller ally as well, for example, the Vikashsheel Insan party, the HAM of Mr. Jitan Ram Manjhi, Mr. Upendra Kushwaha's party, where each of the smaller parties is also stabilized in terms of its cadre network and tries to pull out as many voters as possible. Third is the long-term pattern, where actually since independence perhaps this is going to be the election with the highest turnout in Bihar, and which is a part of a long ongoing pattern of increases. Only when the first detailed SIR was done between 2000 and 2005 did the turnout in hard physical numbers actually drop, which was largely due to curbing practices like booth capturing and pruning down the voter list. But after that, the upward trend has continued. So two factors. One, absolutely contextual, which is the women voter mobilization. Second, the stabilization of the two-party or two-front model in Bihar, which Mr. Kishore is trying to disrupt. Therefore, he's also going to be mobilizing more voters. And third, the long-term pattern of increased turnout, and also the long-term pattern of women gradually narrowing their gap with men. In Bihar, now the gap is on the positive side. In states like Maharashtra, the gap has come down from minus 3.2 to something like minus 1.8.
Okay, so Prabhu Chawla, you've studied elections over the decades. In a typical election, you don't usually see this big surge. We've heard the number crunchers. From your long experience, what do you make of the way the numbers have gone up?
You see, Rahul, I've been watching number cruncher from 1980 onwards. I've seen many opinion polls, 80% of them have gone wrong in states. I've seen all that. One of the issues which are not being discussed in this election, I'm a little surprised because psephologists have not discussed. In our number crunches, we all used to discuss the first-time voters, which is not being mentioned in this debate at all. How many of these 5% extra votes, how many more votes are added who are now 14-year-old when 5 years ago election was held? How many of them have been there in the poll now? What is their percentage? Because they always voted a large number.
Ajija, we traveled together to Bihar. Now, you spoke to several people on the ground there. What do you make of the increase in voter turnout? An 8% increase is a massive increase. From what I gathered from the psephologists, it's not dependent on any one factor. Multiple factors contributed to this new mobilization.
Absolutely. I mean, one is, of course, the fact that the SIR deleted the denominator massively, and the numerator jumped up like 16%, whereas the denominator, which is registered voters, only increased 1%. But what we saw when we went to Simanchal is that there were several diaspora Biharis returning just to vote. And, you know, I ended up, because the flight was delayed, I ended up speaking to not less than 30, 40 of them because they were in different groups. And I wasn't aware initially, but they were talking about things like Tej Raftar. They were using Tej Raftar to describe Tejaswi Yadav, and they were saying Owaisi Chacha. Basically, they were from these two groups, and they were pointing out that they had come all the way. Many of them were vegetable sellers from Panipat, from other places, Rajasthan, and they were coming all the way just to vote.
And this concern... By flight.
By flight.
So migrants coming back for charity.
Yes.
They're also coming back because they were concerned that if they don't vote, their names may get stricken off the next time there's a cleanup.
They talked about that.
So there are two big factors that we're looking at. One, of course, is the surge in voter percentage, which we've seen is 8% up, but about 4% if you take away SIR. The second big issue is to do with women. Just the sheer number of women who came out, the fact that in past elections in Bihar, women seem to have disproportionately voted in favor of Nitish Kumar, and they have the added allure of Narendra Modi on the same ticket. So let's spend some time focusing on the Nari Shakti factor in Bihar. Now here's what you need to look at. From the data that is available at the moment, it may get updated later, but what we know at the moment is that while in the first phase of polling, the total voter percentage was 65.1, men voted at about 61.6, women voted at 69. That's a 7.5% gap. 7.5% gap amongst men and women in this phase. Now that is a huge gap. It's not usual, it's not typical. Such a big gap is quite big. It's happened, for example, in Tamil Nadu in that big Jai Jalalita election. It's happened in the past in Bihar. It's also happened in a state like West Bengal, where women have backed Mamata Banerjee in bigger numbers. But a 7.5% gap is a big factor to look at. Men at 61.6 after phase 1, women at about 69. That's a 7.5% gap. Let's now come to the next set of data that we're looking at. Now here, if you see, these are elections from the past where men have been left behind by women. So women have voted more than men. In 2020, it was 5.3%. In 2015, it was 7.2%. In 2010, it was 3.4%. And in 2005, men voted more than women. The gap was about 2.6%. But if you see, in most elections, women have been voting more, but this is the highest gap between men and women in their voting that we've seen in the past 4 elections in Bihar. Subhrashtra, you come from the state. This is a big factor. Nitish Kumar and NDA are hoping that it is Nari Shakti that will push the NDA back to power.
Yes, I would absolutely say so, because I've consistently maintained that the way in which Nitish Kumar created a constituency in women was, I think, one of the first experiments in Indian politics by a male politician to not only build that constituency but continuously woo that constituency to stay loyal to Nitish ji. And it has happened ever since his first term till now. He has consistently come up with schemes every term, or either schemes or programs or political outreach or during campaigns, special modules to reach out to women that has specifically catered to that constituency. And the fallout of that or the additional advantage of that has been, I'm using the word advantage because as a woman it is really heartening to see that all state governments, even central government, following suit and following the footsteps of Nitish. So for instance, when the first time 35% of jobs were reserved for women in the state with respect to constables, etc., in fact all government offices, it actually paved the way for a policy shift. When in the first term, when he sent girls to school, little did he know that it would create a whole constituency of women, which was not just aspirational in terms of education, but also in terms of aspirations beyond education. So I think it's a carefully curated secular vote bank for Nitish ji, which I hope gets weaponized in the future. Women themselves weaponize themselves in multiple party platforms and start demanding more tickets now. I think we should be done with this whole conversation about women as beneficiaries alone. That's how I look at this.
This is possible. Women thinking of themselves as a consolidated vote bank, rising to some extent above caste lines and definitely not going by what the men folk in the house earlier asked them to do, which used to be the case in previous elections.
Rahul, if you look at these numbers, and the similar numbers for the national vote for Narendra Modi as well, these past 20 years certainly indicate that this surge in voting among women has benefited Nitish, has been crafted and created by Nitish. This is the Nitish legacy as well. And they would, I imagine, be a number of voters who are concerned that the day Nitish stops being Chief Minister, they will lose a very sympathetic Chief Minister. Even if the next Chief Minister is a good person, a good man, good woman.
Because the likes of Prashant Kishore are actually saying they'll bring alcohol back. Now, in a state where women appreciate prohibition,
I have a problem.
That's a big area of concern.
Prohibition does cause problems, does lead to corruption. But the fact is, prohibition among women is also popular. That is a reality. Okay?
Sure.
You can't run away from it. There's one other factor. Traditionally, in Indian families, the patriarch, the man of the house, has decided, 30, 40 years ago, that was truly the case. Now, of course, people have agency. But many of the young girls or teenagers who got cycles in the early Nitish years, and remember him for helping them, enabling them to go to school, probably now have daughters who are approaching voting age. And I suspect they're the
ones who got the cycle for the past 10, 15 years.
I suspect some of the older among them probably have daughters nearing voting age, if not at voting age, I'm not certain. I imagine they are taking cues from their mothers now rather than their fathers in terms of voter choices.
Okay, I want to show you one more set of data. Now, I'm tracking here seats where the percentage of women who voted was more than the men. So if you look at the seats where women voted in larger number than the men, you find that that's typically where Janata Dal United has a very high strike rate. So in 2010, there were 115 seats where women voted more than men. The JDU won 79 of them. Their strike rate, the JDU strike rate was 69%. In 2015, there were 71 such seats where women voted more than men. The JDU won 61 of those. That's a strike rate of a whopping 86%. In 2020, there were 43 seats where the women voted more than men. The JDU strike rate there was 86%. This seems to be a very, very strong bastion of women's support, Ajit Jha, that Nitish Kumar seems to enjoy.
Two things about that, Rahul. First of all, the entire pattern of women voting very high for Nitish Kumar is actually in the north of Bihar, north of the Ganges, especially Mithilanchal and partly Simanchal, but especially Mithilanchal and the areas bordering Champaran, for example, the areas bordering UP. So it's interesting that in the north, where polling is going to take place tomorrow, that's exactly where the JDU has maximum support of women voters. Also, Prime Minister Modi, BJP also kind of sweeps that area, Mithilanchal area, primarily based on the women's turnout and women's voting. So NDA did extremely well in that area in 2020. So mind you, tomorrow is very important for the women's voting behavior.
Let's focus a bit on the women vote. I want to go across to Amitabh Tiwari. You're tracking the numbers very carefully. What is it suggesting to you, Amitabh? While women have come out and voted in bigger numbers than the men, to what extent can the JDU believe that these are our voters? It's been the case in the past. Is it likely to repeat this time as well?
I think why they have come out is largely on account of, I feel it is largely on account of the Mahila Rozgar Yojana rupees, 10,000 rupees, which have been transferred to 1.5 crore women. And that amounts to 40% of the women electorate of the state. And as Ajit Jha mentioned, this is not a one-off out of the blue scheme which Nitish Kumar has announced. It's a series of schemes: improved law and order, then cycle distribution, then uniforms, scholarships, reservation in police force, reservations in panchayat. So all of this, I think, has led Nitish to build a core constituency of women vote bank. Now, when we talk about turnout, if you see from 2005 to 2020, the number of women who have cast their votes in Bihar has doubled from 1.04 to 2.08 crore. At the same time, the number of votes cast by men has become just 1.5x, from 1.41 crore to 2.11 crore. So you see the surge in the number of women voters, not only in terms of turnout, higher turnout, but also in terms of absolute numbers. Now, when we talk about absolute numbers, because there's a lot of discussion that male voters have always been more than female voters, but despite that, we are seeing this trend, correct, where in the number of seats where the women turnout is higher, the JDU has had a very high strike rate, as you've mentioned. Also in the number of seats where women voters are, or women votes cast is more than men votes cast. That is almost 119 seats in 2020. That is half of the seats. The NDA strike rate is 60%, and where men outvoted women, the MGB strike rate was 55%.
I want to introduce Shahnawaz Hussain, senior leader of the Bharatiya Janata Party in Bihar. He's joining us on this broadcast as I bring out this data set on the impact of SIR if you break it down by the different regions. So overall, across the state of Bihar, there was about a 4.89% reduction in the number of voters on the 243 seats. That's the average reduction. The maximum reduction is in the Simanchal region. That's also the bordering region, which is where polls will happen on the 11th of November. 6.12 is the reduction. In Bhojpur, where polls happened in the first phase, it was 5.56, and in the others, the lowest is in Magad, about 3.73. So the maximum reduction on a per seat basis is in Simanchal, 19,576. In Bhojpur, after that, 17,927. The average reduction about 15,809. I want to go across to Shahnawaz Hussain. शाहनवाज जी, स्वागत है आपका एनडीटीवी में। राहुल गांधी कांग्रेस को लग रहा है कि ये जो एसआईआर रिडक्शन का मुद्दा है, ये सबसे बड़ा मुद्दा रहने वाला है। सीमांचल के इलाके में भी, बिहार में भी फेज 2 में उसको वो बढ़ चढ़ कर उतार रहे हैं। आप ट्रैवल कर रहे हैं, कैंपेन कर रहे हैं, देख रहे हैं जमीन से जो फीडबैक आ रहा है, आपको लग रहा है कि जमीन पर वोटर अधिकार, वोटर डिलीशन एक इशू है?
मुझे तो लग रहा है कि किसी भी बाइट में भी मैंने ये किसी विपक्षी के भी ये इशू नहीं सुना है। राहुल गांधी शायद अपने गठबंधन में अकेले नेता हैं जो ये बोल रहे हैं, कोई इस विषय को बोलने वाला भी नहीं है। मैं अपने घर से सुपौल से जुड़ा हूँ और कल मैं वोट डालने वाला हूँ, तो मैं आपको कह सकता हूँ कि ये विषय कहीं पर नहीं आया। यानी लोकल जो स्ट्रिंगर होते हैं या कोई यूट्यूबर होते हैं, उन्होंने भी ये नहीं पूछा है। सिर्फ राहुल गांधी ने एक बयान दे दिया है। और मैं आपको बता दूं, जो उन्होंने वोट अधिकार यात्रा की थी, उसमें जितनी ताकत से लगे थे उतना तो चुनाव में भी नहीं लगे। कहीं भी चुनाव में वो दिखे भी नहीं, ना कोई इम्पैक्ट उनका हुआ। लेकिन क्योंकि एक इशू को उन्होंने फ्लैग किया था, उस इशू को वो बोल रहे हैं। यहाँ पर जनता के बीच में कहीं पर आपने 121 जगह पर चुनाव हो गया, एक जगह कोई पब्लिक इकट्ठा होके नहीं बोली कि उसका वोट छीन लिया गया है। लेकिन कांग्रेस पार्टी हार का बहाना तलाश रही है। अभी जो लोग, जिनका वोट डिलीट हुआ है, उसमें बहुत से लोग ऐसे हैं जो डेथ कर गए, बहुत से लोग हैं जो दिल्ली में बस गए, बहुत से लोगों के 2 वोटर आईडी कार्ड थे